In this Diablo 4 video, I'm going to be showing you my Spirit Bomber build, which is a level 50 plus Necromancer build that focuses on the use of the Bone Spirit skill and dealing incredibly high burst AoE damage. This is intended for World Tier 3, and we'll have an updated version of this once we get to World Tier 4. So let's talk about the general concept of this build and Bone Spirit. What Bone Spirit does is it shoots out a spirit that does AoE damage, and it kind of seeks targets for a modest distance and then explodes. And it deals increased damage for each point of essence you have when you're casting this skill, and it drains your entire essence, essentially. All of your essence will be drained when you cast this, which makes it tricky to use. It also has a cooldown of about 12 seconds at max rank, although if you critically strike with it, you'll actually reduce this by 6 seconds, allowing you to use it again pretty quickly. And if it hits an enemy, you generate 30 essence over the next 4 seconds, so it's not as bad as it first appears. Although I have gear with bonuses to Bone Spirit, I actually do not have a core skill for this build, and I get the bulk of my damage from Bone Spirit, and I also get some from Bone Splinters. This means that there are two aspects that this build needs to focus on. First is how to get Bone Spirit in order to deal enough damage that it can reliably clear a room or a large pack of enemies so that you can use it as your main DPS skill and not have big downtime in between uses. And two, how to get enough essence back in between uses of Bone Spirit so that you get the maximum possible damage with this skill. Because obviously when you cast it at full spirit, full essence, it's going to do way more damage than if you cast it when you have 30 essence, etc. So there are those two factors, and we'll take a look at those. So let's take a look at how to get the most damage out of this first. First of all, we have the key passive Ossified Essence. If you're doing any bone build, this is a no-brainer, and this gives you 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 when you cast. So not only does the skill itself, Bone Spirit, gain extra damage per point of essence you have, but then you're going to get extra damage from this if you cast it above 50 essence, and you should be trying to cast this at full essence every time. Another way we further boost this damage is by that legendary aspect of Serration, which makes it so that that Ossified Essence key passive I just showed you also increases your critical strike damage with bone skills by 1% per essence above 50. This means you're not only going to get regular damage, but you're also going to get increased critical damage, and that's a big part of the reason why critical chance, critical damage are a huge focus of this build. And of course, on your gear, you want to look for anything that gives you increased essence. The higher your max essence is, the more damage this skill is going to use when you cast it because of that legendary aspect, that key passive, and the skill itself. Now, if you're playing this build with minions, which you absolutely can, but I'm playing it solo here, there is an aspect called Requiem aspect that gives you up to 5 maximum essence per minion active. This means that you can have, 10, 11, 12 minions active. You can have something like 50 or 60 extra maximum essence, and this will make it so that your skills hit even harder when you cast them. The downside is that you'll have to invest passive points into keeping these alive in your skill tree, otherwise they will die, and that's a lot of skill points investment. Plus, you don't gain the extra bonuses to crit damage, critical chance, vulnerable damage from sacrificing them. So there are trade-offs, but you could absolutely play this build as a minion master and still play this playstyle. If you look around our skill tree, you'll notice that I have all the bone passives I've taken. Anything that increases damage, like damage at long distance, damage at close range, damage to cursed enemies, anything where I can get more damage out of, I've taken, and some of those points won't be available to you if you go the Minion Master route with this build, but that's kind of the trade-off there. Okay, moving on, talking about how we get essence back so that we can use this at full essence. Well, first of all, we have Bone Splinters we can attack with to regain essence. This is the simplest way. If you have like a lone enemy and you don't want to waste time or, an ability like, using Bone Spirit on it, you're going to use Bone Splinters. And Bone Splinters actually does quite a bit of damage. You can kill enemies with it very easily with this build, particularly if you're close range. So don't be afraid to use Bone Splinters. And secondly, we have the aspect of Exposed Flesh. This makes it so that on lucky hit, you have up to a 10% chance to generate up to 50 essence when you hit a vulnerable enemy with a bone skill. Bone Splinters can set vulnerability. If you have Bone Spear, like you could use it in this build, I don't, but you could. That can set vulnerability, but really how we get vulnerability with this build is Corpse Tendrils. Corpse Tendrils pulls in enemies by using a corpse, it stuns them, and then it sets vulnerability. This is really great for grouping up enemies to use your Bone Spirit into, because then they're all packed nicely for your explosion. And all you need for this is a corpse, so maybe if you used Bone Spirit once, and then you use a corpse for this, you can pull in all the remaining enemies, get them vulnerable, and then use it again. And they not only get the increased damage from vulnerability, but then you get that trigger and boom, you're instantly back up to full essence after casting it. It's really, really nice for this build. And one really good aspect for this build too is the aspect of Grasping Veins. This makes it so that you have up to 20% increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds when you cast Corpse Tendrils. and also up to 60% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by your corpse tendrils. So if you catch anything in there, it's going to be vulnerable, then you're going to have even more chance to critically strike, and then you're going to deal even more damage. As you move forward with this build, this is going to be a huge part, because if you put this on a two-handed weapon, for instance, it's up to 40% critical strike chance and 120% critical strike damage to enemies in your corpse tendrils. Another aspect we have here is aspect of the Umbral. This makes it so when you crowd control an enemy, you gain up to 4 of your primary resource back, being essence in this case. So again, when you use corpse tendrils, you're going to group up all these enemies, and that's going to just instantly give you a bunch of resources. So it might be a bit overkill to have both of these, but odds are you probably won't have both. So having one of these is probably good enough. So those things being said and solved, this leaves us like the survivability of this build. How do you survive as a solo necromancer? Well, we have a couple of ways to do that with this build. First of all, we have aspect of the Protector, pretty straightforward, gives you a damage shield whenever you fight elites. This is really good for this build. You're going to take damage when you fight elites, and no better way than to just protect yourself with an instant damage shield. And we also use Decrepify here. This makes it so enemies struck by it deal less damage to you for the duration of about 10 seconds. They're also slowed, so then you'll have increased damage to CC'd enemies. So that reduces damage you take. It also increases your damage because we have the Amplify passive. And also, it reduces, you have a lucky hit chance to reduce the cooldown of your skills, if you hit enemies that are under this effect. So Bone Spirit has a chance to, cool down faster, which is great, and so does your Bone Storm ultimate. And Bone Storm is really the other way we stay alive with this. You deal damage, you have increased crit chance while this is up, and you also reduce the damage around you of enemies while this is up around you. And if you have the aspect of Shielding Storm, that makes it so that Bone Storm, whenever it damages an enemy, you gain a barrier equal to 5% of your base life for 10 seconds. That is a crazy amount of damage. If you use this in the middle of like a group of 10, 15 enemies, something like that, you're going to have, you're going to be unkillable basically for that 10 seconds. So this can really help with your survivability. Additionally, I have the aspect of Osseous Gale here, which makes it so that Bone Storm consumes up to 8 corpses, increasing its duration by up to 16 seconds. And I don't have Corpse Explosion in this build, and this is one of the reasons I don't have it, because this is going to suck up a lot of the corpses and extend the duration of Bone Storm, extending your damage, your critical chance, the damage reduced by enemies. So this is really, really nice for this build. It just happened to roll on my weapon the way it came, so I just left it that way. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't put this on my two-handed weapon. But between the cooldown reduction of Decrepify and between the extended duration of this, you should be able to keep most of your Bone Storm up most of the time. There should be maybe 5 to 10 seconds in between Bone Storms, which is really going to help keep you alive. Remember also that Rapid Ossification makes it so every 100 essence you spend, you reduce the cooldown of your bone skills by 1.5 seconds. This is going to apply to Bone Spirit, obviously, but also it's going to apply to Bone Storm. So this is really huge, because every time you dump, with Bone Spirit, you're going to shave off 1.5 seconds of that ability. And if you have any cooldown reduction on your skills, on your gear, that's really, really good too. So lastly, talking about the Paragon system here, I'm using the Exploit Glyph. This makes it so you deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and also dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases your damage for 6 seconds. So you're going to gain extra damage against vulnerable. This happens all the time, and is a good way to boost your damage at this point. And then I like the Bone Graph tree for the second board. This, if you get this legendary, it makes it so hitting enemies with bone skills increases your damage and your maximum essence. This stacks up to 3 times. This is great. We'll get this eventually, but I've opted to go a different way here at the beginning. Our priority here is to get the rare node Reinvigorate and the nodes around it that increase your max essence and give you essence back on kill. This is going to help get your essence back up quickly so that you can use Bone Spirit at max essence every time. And then once you've gotten that, you're going to move up to the Calcified node, and this is going to increase your damage with bone skills and your critical strike damage with bone skills. And there's a bunch of nodes around that that further boost your critical strike and regular damage with bone skills. And those are all really, really good to have as well. So you should have the general concept of this build by now. Run up to enemies, hit Bone Spirit, destroy a few of them, use Corpse Tendrils, pull in the remaining them, use Bone Spirit again to finish them off. Rinse and repeat, use Bone Storm to run around the map, run through groups of enemies or where you're in, trouble. And make sure to use Decrepify to debuff enemies and help reduce the cooldown of your Bone Spirit and also your Bone Storm so that you can use them more regularly. Again, you can use this with minions as well in order to get more essence, which can further boost the damage of these, but you'll have to sacrifice some of the passives I mentioned in order to pick up survivability passives for your minions, or they will be constantly dying, and you also have to manage them throughout these fights. So that wraps up our Spirit Bomber build. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We have more builds coming. I have another Rogue build, a Trapper build coming, and we have another Barbarian and Sorcerer build coming not too far either. Stay tuned for those.